Hey, it is Monday. How are you, my friends? I hope you had a great weekend. And I just have to stop a moment and just let you all know that I am in the house all by myself. I don't quite know how it happened, but I have not realized just how much I have missed being by myself. The thing about lockdown is, yes, you don't get to see your friends, but you do get to see your family every single day. Every day. You get to see those teenagers, you get to see that husband, and I love them all. But whatever reason, I think because McDonald's opened, they are not here. So I just took back the kitchen from the homeschooling. I am spreading my arms out wide because there's no one else here. I am speaking really loudly. I've just realized I'm just having a moment right now where no one else is in the house. So I love you all, to my kids and my husband, but thank you all for leaving at the same time. We must do this again. Anyway, I'm using the opportunity to come and start off the week with you and say a big happy Monday, and I hope that you are good, that you are well, and I actually have been walking and talking with my husband every single day, and I keep trying to decide when do we end today, I choose. So I'm praying about that. I'm thinking about that. I think that there'll always be a commitment maybe to this journey we've gone on together, but it might change when it gets into summer maybe. I don't know. So I'm just asking for wisdom on that. I do love you. I do miss you when I'm not on here, but also I realize many of you are going back to normal. Life is returning to some kind of normality for some, not everyone, but for some. But whilst we're together at the beginning of another week, I actually really want to just journey with you what I spoke about on Sunday, yesterday, to our church. You know, there's times when you just deliver a message and you just sense that God's hands on it for such a time as this, just to remind some people, just to pick up some people that maybe just really need to be picked up right now, as it were, with the words of encouragement, words of life. And I do love to start Monday with words of life and words of encouragement. Maybe you watch the message, you can go and watch it. It's at Life Church Home, but maybe you were with your own church and so you didn't get to catch up on that. But I want to break it down for us today to go through it, because even if you did listen, I think it's worth us actually going through it together. And so I've been speaking for the last few weeks with our church at home here about gaps that can occur in all of our lives. So we've covered all kinds of gaps that our church have every week lent into saying, okay, where, God, is that gap in my life? And then we've broken down the word gap to say it can become God's acceleration place. And I do believe that when we invite God into the gap of our weariness, when we invite God into the gap of our unforgiveness, God begins to do things in that gap. And the one that I really felt to speak about to our church and to you today, and maybe tomorrow, who knows where this will end up, is the gap that we could call the gap of unfair. Right? You have kids, if you are ever around younger children, you'll often hear the expression, it's not fair, right? And they're referring to maybe a sibling went to bed later than them, or maybe they didn't get the ice cream that the other person got. And so you'll hear them say it's not fair. And maybe you have, like I have, in reply to that comment said, well, life's not fair. Because that is the truth. Life is not fair. There are different circumstances that life deals us all, and God is faithful and God is just, but life has circumstances, and the playing field of life is not even. Some are born into really happy families where they don't have to want for anything, and that is not the way that some people arrive into the world. They arrive into the world in a place where there actually is lack, and actually there is broken relationships. We all arrive to different circumstances, and then we journey with different circumstances. And to be honest, right now, maybe you're saying life is unfair because because this season of lockdown has handed you kind of a deck of cards that you were not expecting, and now you're having to navigate them. Maybe you had a job before this and now you don't. Maybe your relationship was great and now it is so stressful and tense. Maybe there were things in your life that before this that you didn't have to actually deal with, but now because of this, you are having to deal with. And we could actually all say in our own way, life is unfair. It's unfair in this way, it's unfair in that way. And you would be right. I wouldn't argue with you. We all have a different level of circumstance and experience. But I really want to speak into that, because in that gap called unfair, or whatever you want to call it, in that gap, we can either get bitter and we can get hardened towards God. We can get resentful and jealous that other people's lives seems to be much more fairer than our life. We can begin to want what somebody has and despise what we have been given. And I don't want us in that gap of circumstances giving us something that we feel is hard to navigate, us making it worse by us not knowing what to do in that gap. And that's why I want to take some time today, and I'm pretty sure probably tomorrow and maybe the next day, because I really, really, really want to help you today, if you're living in that gap, to figure a way forward, to actually not grow bitter, but actually in that gap, to actually learn some stuff and actually know that you are not staying there, that gap will not define you. It is not the end of your story. I want to put faith in you this week. I want to put some passion in your heart this week. I want to get you to get up wherever you are right now, and in your heart and in your declaration at the beginning of this week, say, you know what? I can do this. And you know what? God is with me. And you know what? His favor is ahead of me and before me. And that's what I want to let you know today. Life may be unfair, but my friends, the good news is, so is God's favor. God's favor is something we don't deserve. God's favor is something that we could never earn. It is unfairly poured out on us. It is bestowed on our lives. And I honestly want to speak into you and let you know that favor is heading your way. I'm declaring it over you. I am beginning to pray over you this week, that this week you'd have a revelation that God's favor will find you even in the place where you feel life has left you and it's been unfair. Let me just think about a few stories with you in the Bible. What about Moses? Okay, he was born at a time when the edict in the land was, if a baby boy was born, they were to be murdered at birth. That was an unfair circumstance he was born into. And then his mother had to let him go. That was unfair. Then he was placed in a basket, and who knew where he would end up? All of those things we could say were unfair at the beginning of Moses' life. He had a stutter that actually was something that he struggled with all his life. It was unfair, and yet we can either look at the unfair that life handed him or the favor of God that was about to visit him and use him and transform him. What about the unfair of the situation of being Jabez? Jabez, who was named pain because his mother said, I birthed you in pain. When I see you, I see pain. When I am around you, I'm reminded of pain. So I'm going to give you a name that always lets you know pain is what I see in you. That is an unfair name to give a child. But Jabez's story did not end there, because God said that might have been unfair, but when he called out, God enlarge me, God increase me, God give me more, God answered his prayer with favor. What about Job? Job, whose life was great in one moment. He had all kinds of prosperity. His business was booming. His cattle were on the hills, filling the hills. His family and his children were well. His servants loved him. He had it all going on. And then circumstances changed, literally overnight. Job found that his cattle were dying, that his family was sick, that his own body had boils and blisters on it. He had an unfair set of circumstances dealt to him. But that was not the end of his story, because God's favor found Job and restored Job, and didn't just restore him, but over the top recompensated him for all that he had lost. And so I want to put faith in you right now, that maybe you're sat there saying, well, life is unfair. Right now now I've lost my job. Right now I can't see my friends. Right now I didn't cause this. I didn't create this. But financially I am struggling. I get it. I hear you. I see you. I don't see you actually, but I see you. And I want you to know, so does God. Do not let the gap that you are in right now become the place where you stay. Don't let it become the prison that you get yourself in. This week, we are going to start the week by busting out of that place called unfair and busting open the favor of God. You can tell I'm on a mission this week to envision you and passion to grow in you. And there's something about you that will believe again. Maybe you've just stopped believing. I want you to believe again. And so I want to remind you, it says in Psalm 23, doesn't it? That well-known Psalm, that God actually, he leads us. He leads us beside still waters. And it says that he has us lay down in green pastures. But in Psalm 23, it also says this, that he walks us through the valley of darkness. He walks us through the valley of the shadow of death. And what can happen is that we can get those two things mixed up. We can actually begin to lay down in the valley of the shadow of death, lay down in the valley of darkness, and don't realize actually God never said to lay down there. God said you're going to walk through there. Where he said you would lay down is in green pastures. Where he said you would lay down is beside still waters. So let's not allow the circumstances of life to begin to tell us this is where you stop, this is where you end, this is where you quit, this is where you lay down. No, if it is not a green pasture, if it's not a place of blessing, if it's not beside still waters, it is not the place for you to lay down. But it is the place for you to actually keep walking towards. And so I want to challenge you at the beginning of this week, where would you say right now, okay, life has been unfair? And I want you to begin to identify that gap. And then I want to ask you this question. Are you laying down there? Are you allowing yourself to actually become identified with the pain or identified with the unfairness? Or are you keeping walking? There's something about keeping walking that has to happen in our lives for us to move towards the favor of God. Listen, the favor of God, the unmerited grace and favor of God, He's going to pour it out in all of our lives because He's a good Father. He can't resist His kids. He can't resist helping them. He can't resist directing the basket that Moses was in to a place where he ended up in a palace, a place where he ended up in a place of power and authority. He can't resist giving Job back more than he ever lost. He can't resist enlarging Jabez's territory. He can't. And I could go on with story after story. But those people, all of them, were people that kept moving. You don't read that Moses was stuck in the basket. His life kept moving. And even when he was in a place where he was actually serving and in the place where actually his people were being oppressed, he still was moving. He still was learning. He still was growing. And then Jabez, even though it was labeled pain, he was still seeking. He was still reaching. He was still asking. Job, he never laid down in that place. He felt like it. He had feelings of misunderstood. He doesn't understand why this has happened. He had questions, but he said, why should I accept good from God and not bad? He said, I will not curse God and die. And Job continued in conversation. Job continued in journey to keep moving. If you have stopped today in the place where circumstances has placed you, my challenge at the beginning of this week is to get up inside yourself and say, I am not lying down in a dark valley. I am walking towards a green pasture. I'm going to find the pasture. I'm going to head there because God's favor is calling you forward. And this Monday is going to be a different week. The start of this week is going to look entirely different if you don't allow circumstances to be the only thing you talk about, think about, complain about, and sleep and lie down in. But instead say, yes, life has been unfair, but the favor of God is also unfair, and I believe He's going to pour it out on me. Okay, that was the intro. I am so excited. Time is up, but tomorrow, let's visit this again. Can't wait to see you then. Love you guys. Today, let's choose to close that gap.